Welcome to the Big Bad Shark Show. We are delighted here at Big Bad Shark Productions to bring you, on this very special International Women's Day, a reflection of some of our favorite historical heroes. Here we're going to review the last year's 12-month historical heroes, back to back. Well, some may ask, but Shark, why the historical heroes? Why those 12 particular women? These women are actually my ancestors, and the Big Bad Shark Show is full of nepotism, and so we play favorites, and this is how we do it. So I thought we would take this moment on this International Women's Day to celebrate these 12 historical heroes. Hello, and welcome to another Ocean Tides with the Big Bad Shark. This is part of our new series, spotlighting historical heroes. This month we are spotlighting the amazing Harriet Beecher Stow. According to National Women's History Museum, Dr. Deborah Michaels writes, abolitionist author Harriet Beecher Stow rose to fame in 1851 with the publication of her best-selling book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, which highlighted the evils of slavery, angered the slaveholding South, and inspired pro-slavery copycat works in defense of the institution of slavery. Stow was born on June 14, 1811 in Litchfield, Connecticut, the seventh child of famed congressional minister Lyman Beecher and Roxana Foote Beecher. Her famous siblings included elder sister Catherine, 11 years her senior, and Henry Ward Beecher, the famous preacher and reformer. Stow's mother died when she was 5 years old, and while her father remarried, her sister Catherine became the most pronounced influence on young Harriet's life. At age 8, she began her education at the Litchfield Female Seminary, which exposed young women to many of the same courses available in men's academics. Stow's proclivity for writing was evident in the essays she produced for school. Stow became a teacher, working from 1829 to 1832 at the Hartford Female Seminary. In 1832, when Stow's father, Lyman, accepted the position of president at the esteemed Lane Seminary in Cincinnati, Ohio, she went with him. There, she met some of the great minds and reformers of the day, including noted abolitionists. Smitten with the landscape of the West, she published her first book, Primary Geography, in 1833, which celebrated the diverse cultures and vistas that she encountered. In 1836, she met and married Calvin Stow, a professor at Lane Seminary. He encouraged her writing. They had 7 children and weathered financial and other problems during their decades-long union. Stow would write countless articles. Some were published in the renowned women's magazine of the times, Godey's Lady Book. She also wrote 30 books covering a wide range of topics from homemaking to religion in nonfiction, as well as several novels. The turning point in Stow's personal and literary life came in 1849, when her son died in a cholera epidemic that claimed nearly 3,000 lives in her region. She later said that the loss of her child inspired great empathy for enslaved mothers who had their children sold away from them. The passage of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which legally compelled Northerners to return runaway slaves, infuriated Stow and many in the North. This was when Stow penned what would become her most famous work, the novel Uncle Tom's Cabin. Originally serialized in the national era, Stow saw her tale as a call to arms for Northerners to defy the Fugitive Slave Act. The vivid characters and great empathy inspired by the book was further aided by Stow's strong Christianity. Uncle Tom's Cabin was released as a book in March 1852, selling 300,000 copies in the U.S. in the first year. It was later performed on stage and translated into dozens of languages. When some claimed her portrait of slavery was inaccurate, Stow published Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin, a book of primary source historical documents that backed up her account, including the narratives of notable former slaves Frederick Douglass and Josiah Henderson. Southern pro-slavery advocates countered with books of their own, such as Mary Henderson Eastman's Aunt Phyllis's Cabin, or Southern Life as It Is. This work and others like it attempted to portray slavery as a benevolent institution, but never received the acclaim or widespread leadership of Stow's. Stow used her name to petition to end slavery. She toured nationally and internationally, speaking about her book and donating some of what she earned to help the anti-slavery cause. She also wrote extensively on behalf of abolition, most notably her Appeal to Women of the Free States of America on the Present Crisis on Our Country, which she hoped would help raise public outcry to defeat the 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act. During the Civil War, Stow became one of the most visible professional writers. For years, popular folklore claimed that President Abraham Lincoln, upon meeting Stow in 1862, said, quote, "So you're the woman who wrote the book that started this great war," end quote. That quote, published in a 1911 biography of Stow by her son Charles, has been called into question, as Stow herself and two others present at the meeting make no reference to it in their accounts, and Charles was only a boy at the time of the meeting. In 1873, Stow and her family moved to Hartford, Connecticut, where she remained until her death in 1896. Summering in Florida, she helped breathe new life into the Wadsworth Antietam Museum of Art and was involved with efforts to launch the Hartford Art School, later part of the University of Hartford. Well, we are honored this month to celebrate the great Harriet Beecher Stow, and we recognize and respect the monumental contributions that your legacy has given this country and many all over the world. We celebrate you this month, Harriet Beecher Stow, and thank you for joining us. And remember, swim safe. Swim safe. Goodbye. This month, we're spotlighting the great Dr. Alice Stokes Paul. According to Wikipedia, Dr. Paul was born in the late 1800s and died in 1977. She was an American Quaker, suffragist, and feminist, as well as a women's rights activist and one of the main leaders and strategists of the campaign for the 19th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which prohibits sex discrimination in the right to vote. Dr. Paul initiated, along with Lucy Burns and others, strategized events such as the Women's Suffrage Procession and the Silent Sentinels, which were a part of the successful campaign that resulted in the amendment passage in August of 1920. Wow, Dr. Paul, without you, the big bad shark wouldn't be able to vote. Dr. Paul often suffered police brutality and other physical abuse for her activism, always responding with nonviolence and courage. She was jailed under terrible conditions in 1917 for her participation in the Silent Sentinels protest in front of the White House, as she had been several times during earlier efforts to secure the vote for women in England. After 1920, Paul spent a half a century as the leader of National Women's Party, which fought for the Equal Rights Amendment, written by Dr. Paul and Crystal Eastman, to secure constitutional equality for women. She won a major permanent success with the inclusion of women as a group protected against discrimination by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Wow, Dr. Paul, you're an incredible, amazing American hero. We're honored to spotlight you this month of January 2023. While associated with the Women's Social and Political Union, Paul was arrested 7 times and imprisoned 3 times. It was during her time in prison that she learned the tactics of civil disobedience. Another popular civil disobedience tactic used by the suffragettes was hunger striking. A couple things that happened in these hunger strikes that some of these activists went through. According to Wikipedia, in solidarity with other activists in her organization, Dr. Paul purposefully strove to receive the 7-month jail sentence that started on October 20th, 1917. The women were given no special treatment as political prisoners and had to live in harsh conditions with poor sanitation, infested food, and dreadful facilities. In protest of the conditions at the district jail, Paul began a hunger strike. This led to her being moved to the prison's psychiatric ward and being force-fed raw eggs through a feeding tube. Seems almost unthinkable now, doesn't it? Paul told an interviewer from the American Heritage when asked about the force feeding, quote, "It was shocking that a government of men could look with such extreme contempt on a movement that was asking nothing except such a simple little thing as the right to vote." End quote. As you can see, we are incredibly honored to spotlight this incredible American hero in history. Dr. Alice Stokes Paul, we honor you. Thank you for enjoying this episode of Ocean Tides, Historical Heroes. Join us next month when we spotlight our next historical hero. Remember, swim safe, everyone. Swim safe. Goodbye. This month, we are spotlighting Elizabeth Cady Stanton. According to Britannica.com, Miss Elizabeth was an American leader in the women's rights movement who, in 1848, formulated the first concerted demand for women's suffrage in the United States. She was the daughter of a member of the House of Representatives who later became a Supreme Court judge, so she was afforded a great education and studied law. It was through her father's office she learned of the great inequalities between the genders and set out to bring equality to hers. She even insisted that obey be dropped from her wedding vows to her husband. "Oh, Elizabeth, you're my hero." She attended the World Anti-Slavery Convention in London and was outraged at denial of official recognition of several women delegates. She became a frequent speaker on the subject of women's rights and circulated petitions that helped secure passage by New York State Legislature in 1848 of a bill granting married women's property rights. In 1854, Stanton received an unprecedented invitation to address the New York legislature. Her speech resulted in new legislation in 1860, granting married women the rights to wages and equal guardianship of their children. From 1851, she worked closely with Susan B. Anthony. Together, they remained active for 50 years. Stanton, the better orator and writer, was perfectly complemented by Anthony, the organizer and tactician. She wrote not only her own and many of Anthony's addresses, but also countless letters and pamphlets, as well as articles and essays for numerous periodicals, including Amelia Bloomer's Lily. Stanton continued to write and lecture tirelessly. She was the principal author for the Declaration of Rights for Women presented at the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia in 1876. In 1878, she drafted a federal suffrage amendment that was introduced into every U.S. Congress. Thereafter, until women were granted the right to vote by the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution in 1920. Wow, Miss Elizabeth Katy Stanton, we are happy to spotlight this wonderful hero. You are certainly a hero to me. Thank you for enjoying this episode of Ocean Tides, Historical Heroes. Join us next month when we spotlight our next historical hero. Remember, swim safe, everyone. Swim safe. Goodbye. This month, the beginning of Women's History Month, we are delighted to celebrate the wonderful Clarissa Harlow Barton, also known as Clara Barton, born December 25, 1821. According to Wikipedia, she was an American nurse who founded the American Red Cross. She was a hospital nurse in the American Civil War, a teacher, and a patent clerk. Barton is noteworthy for doing humanitarian work and civil rights advocacy at a time before women even had the right to vote. She was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in 1973. Her first introduction into the medical field was tending to her own brother at nearly 10 years of age. At the onset of the Civil War, Barton provided crucial personal assistance to the men in the uniform, many of whom were wounded, hungry, and without supplies, other than what they carried on their backs. Barton quickly recognized them, as she had grown up with some of them and even taught some. Barton, along with several other women, personally provided clothing, food, and supplies for the sick and wounded soldiers. She learned how to store and distribute medical supplies and offered emotional supports to the soldiers by keeping their spirits high. She would read books to them, write letters to their families for them, talk to them, and support them. In 1864, she was appointed by Union General Benjamin Butler as the, quote, lady in charge of the hospitals at the front of the Army of the James. Among her more harrowing experiences was an incident in which a bullet tore through the sleeve of her dress without striking her and killed a man whom she was tending. She was known as the Florence Nightingale of America. She was also known as the Angel of the Battlefield, after she came to the aid of an overwhelmed surgeon on duty. Following the Battle of Cedar Mountain in Northern Virginia in August 1862, she arrived at a field hospital at midnight with a large number of supplies to help the severely wounded soldiers. After the end of the American Civil War, Barton discovered that thousands of letters from distraught relatives to the War Department were going unanswered because the soldiers they were asking about were buried in unmarked graves. Many of the soldiers were labeled as missing. Motivated to do more about the situation, Miss Barton contacted President Lincoln in hopes that she would be allowed to respond officially to the unanswered inquiries. She was given permission. Barton and her assistants wrote 41,855 replies to inquiries and helped locate more than 22,000 missing men. Barton spent the summer of 1865 helping find, identify, and bury 13,000 individuals who died at Andersonville Prison Camp, a Confederate prisoner of war camp in Georgia. She continued this task over the next 4 years, burying 20,000 more Union soldiers and marking their graves. According to the redcross.org, on May 21, 1881, Clara Barton founded the American Red Cross and by 1882 ratified the Geneva Conventions, laws that to this day protect the war wounded and civilians in conflict zones. This later resulted in the U.S. Congressional Charter officially recognizing Red Cross services. Clara Barton served as the Red Cross president for 23 years, retiring in 1904. In a letter to Denny seeking permission to go to the front on March 30th, 1862, Clara spoke, "Though it is little that one woman can do, still I crave the privilege of doing it." Clara Barton died April 12th of 1912. Well, Miss Clara Barton, and I'm not biased simply because I am a nurse, we owe you a debt of gratitude, and we are humbled to celebrate your life. And on this day of Women's History Month, thank you, Clara Barton. We are happy to spotlight this wonderful hero. You are certainly a hero to me. Thank you for enjoying this episode of Ocean Tides, Historical Heroes. Join us next month when we spotlight our next historical hero. Remember, swim safe, everyone. Swim safe. Goodbye. This month, we are spotlighting the wonderful Maria Mitchell. According to Wikipedia, Miss Mitchell was an American astronomer, a librarian, naturalist, and educator. In 1847, she discovered a comet that was later known as Miss Mitchell's Comet in her honor. Born August 1st, 1818, the third of 10 children, Mitchell and her siblings were raised in the Quaker religion, a faith with tenets valuing education and sensible work. Gotta love those Quakers. Her father educated all his children about nature and astronomy, and her mother's employment at 2 libraries gave them access to a variety of knowledge. Mitchell particularly showed both an interest in and a talent for astronomy and advanced mathematics. Go STEM! At 10:50 p.m. on the night of October 1st, 1847, Mitchell discovered a comet. She published a notice about her discovery January 1848 under her father's name. The following month, she submitted her calculations of the comet's orbit, ensuring her claim as the original discoverer. Mitchell became a celebrity following her discovery and awards, with hundreds of newspaper articles written about her in the subsequent decade. At her home in Nantucket, she entertained a number of prominent academics at the time, such as Ralph Waldo Emerson, Herman Melville, and Frederick Douglass. In 1841, she attended the Anti-Slavery Convention in Nantucket, where Frederick Douglass made his first speech, and she also became involved in the anti-slavery movement by refusing to wear clothes made of Southern cotton. Yeah, protesting where it hurts. Pocketbooks. Though Mitchell herself did not have a college education, she was appointed professor of astronomy at Vassar College by the founder in 1865 and became the first female professor of astronomy. She later became involved in a number of social issues as a professor, particularly those pertaining to women's suffrage and education. She befriended various suffragists, including Elizabeth Katy Stanton. After returning from a trip to Europe in 1873, Mitchell joined the National Women's Movement and helped found the Association for Advancement of Women, the AAW, a group dedicated to the educational reform and the promotion of women in higher education. We got to hand it to those Quakers for maintaining equality early on, and thank you, Maria Mitchell, for being one of our historical heroes. Remember, swim safe, everyone. Swim safe. Goodbye. This month, we are spotlighting the great Dr. Mary Edwards Walker. According to the National Women's History Museum website, in all of the United States history, there's only been one woman to receive the Medal of Honor. Mary Edwards Walker is that woman. As a surgeon, women's rights advocate, abolitionist, and spy, Walker became the first female U.S. Army surgeon during the Civil War. Mary Edwards Walker was born November 26, 1832 in Oswego, New York. She was the 5th daughter of abolitionists Alva and Vesta Whitcomb Walker. Her parents encouraged her to think freely and allowed her to wear bloomer pants instead of the skirts and corsets that women were required to wear at the time. Education was also very important to the Walker family. Mary's parents started the first free school in Oswego, New York, so that their daughters would be just as educated as their son. When Walker graduated, she became a teacher, but she knew she always wanted to become a doctor. She worked until she saved enough money to pay for medical school. Walker then attended Syracuse Medical College and received her medical degree in 1855. She became the second woman to graduate from college after Elizabeth Blackwell. Shortly after she graduated, Walker married another medical student, Albert Miller, on November 16, 1855. They started a medical practice together in Rome, New York. However, the practice did not succeed because the public did not want to accept a female doctor. She went to Washington, but was not allowed to serve as a medical officer because she was a woman. That dreaded disease, being a woman, it gets you every time. She decided to still serve as an unpaid volunteer surgeon at the U.S. Patent Office Hospital in Washington. At the time, the Army had no female surgeons, so Walker was only allowed to practice as a nurse. However, in 1863, her request to practice as a surgeon was finally accepted. She became the first female U.S. Army surgeon. During her work as a surgeon in the war, Walker often crossed battle lines to care for soldiers and civilians. In April of 1864, Walker had just finished helping a Confederate doctor with a surgery when she was captured by Confederate troops as a spy. She was held as a prisoner of war for 4 months. While imprisoned, she refused to wear the women's clothing provided to her. She wore men's clothes her entire life because they were more comfortable and hygienic. She even wore pants under her skirt at her wedding. Walker was released from prison in August of 1964 and became the assistant surgeon of the Ohio 52nd Infantry a month later. After the war, Walker was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Andrew Johnson. A few years later, Walker published a book called Hit in 1871. In addition to her work with the Army, she began to advocate for women's rights. She famously wore pants and advocated for dress reform. Walker was awarded the Medal of Honor. She was arrested in New Orleans in 1870 because she dressed like a man. Walker responded by saying, "I don't wear men's clothes. I wear my own clothes." You're my idol. She also fought for suffrage and tried to register to vote in 1871, but she was denied. Walker then participated in politics by campaigning for the U.S. Senate in 1881 and running as a Democratic candidate for Congress in 1890. Although she lost both times, she testified in front of the U.S. House of Representatives in support of women's suffrage. In 1916, the Medal of Honor was taken away from Walker and many others after the government reviewed their eligibility. Although she was given the award by the president, she did not meet the requirements to qualify for the award. However, this did not stop Walker from wearing her award until her death in 1919, at the age of 86. Decades later, President Jimmy Carter legally restored the Medal of Honor to Walker's name. Well, this month we are honored to honor this historical hero and my personal favorite hero, Dr. Mary Edwards Walker. Thank you for your service. Thank you, and remember, swim safe, everyone. Swim safe. Goodbye. This month we are spotlighting Amelia Janks Bloomer. According to Wikipedia, Amelia was born May 27, 1818, and was an American newspaper editor, women's rights, and temperance advocate. Even though she did not create the women's clothing reform style known as bloomers, her name became associated with it because of her strong and early advocacy. In her work with the Lily, she became the first woman to own, operate, and edit a newspaper for women. Amelia was born in 1818 in Homer, New York, to Mr. and Mrs. Janks. She was one of the youngest in a large family, having at least 4 sisters, 2 brothers. She came from a family of modest means and received only a few years of formal education in a local district school. After a brief time as a school teacher at the age of 17, she decided to relocate and moved in with her newly married sister, Elvira, then living in Waterloo. Within a year, she had moved into the home of Orrin Chamberlain family in Seneca Falls to act as the live-in governess for their 3 youngest children. On April 15, 1840, when she was 22, she married law student Dexter Bloomer, who encouraged her to write for his New York newspaper, the Seneca Falls County Courier. Bloomer supported her activism. He even gave up drinking as part of the temperance movement. The following year, she began editing the first newspaper by and for women, The Lily, published bi-weekly from 1849 until 1853. The newspaper began as a temperance journal, but came to have a broad mix of contents ranging from recipes to moralist tracts, particularly when under the influence of suffragists Elizabeth Katy Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. Bloomer felt that because women lecturers were considered unseemly, writing was the best way for women to work for reform. In her publication, Bloomer promoted a change in dress standards for women that would be less restrictive in regular activities. In 1851, New England temperance activist Elizabeth Smith Miller, aka Libby Miller, adopted what she considered a more rational costume. Loose trousers gathered at the ankles, like women's trousers worn in the Middle East and Central Asia, topped by a short dress or skirt. Miller displayed her new clothing to Stanton, her cousin, who found it sensible and becoming, and adopted it immediately. In this garb, Stanton visited Bloomer, who began to wear the costume and promote it enthusiastically in her magazines. More women wore the fashions, which was promptly dubbed the Bloomer costume, or Bloomers. However, the Bloomers were subjected to ceaseless ridicule in the press and harassments on the street. Bloomer herself returned to longer skirts by 1859, noting that her motives were severalfold. After moving to Iowa, she felt a desire to blend into the new social world and make friends, which she felt was easier in more fashionable garments. She also noted that a few inventions, such as the crinoline, did away with the heavy underskirts that she had objected to, and that she felt that there were more important things for her to focus her energy on. Also in 1851, Bloomer introduced the suffragettes Elizabeth Katy Stanton and Susan B. Anthony to each other. Bloomer remained a suffrage pioneer and writer throughout her life, writing for a wide array of periodicals. Although Bloomer was far less famous than some of the other feminists, she made many significant contributions to the women's movement, particularly concerning dress reform. Bloomer also led suffrage campaigns in Nebraska and Iowa, and served as president of the Iowa Women's Suffrage Association from 1871 to 1873. She died December 30th, 1894, at the age of 76, and is buried in the Fairview Cemetery, Council Bluffs, Iowa. Miss Amelia Janks Bloomer, we are privileged to celebrate you in this month of June for our historical heroes. Thank you. Remember, swim safe, everyone. Swim safe. Goodbye. This month, we are spotlighting the wonderful Dorothia Dix. According to Arlisha Norwood, the NWHM Fellow of the National Women's History Museum website, Dorothea Dix was an early 19th century activist who drastically changed the medical field during her lifetime. She championed causes for both the mentally ill and indigenous populations. By doing this work, she openly challenged 19th century notions of reform and illness. Additionally, Dix helped recruit nurses for the Union Army during the Civil War. As a result, she transformed the field of nursing. Go Dorothea! The Big Bad Shark is a nurse, so of course, I am biased. Dix was born in Hampden, Maine in 1802. Little is known about her childhood, however, historians do believe that her parents suffered from alcoholism and her father may have been abusive. Due to this abuse at a young age, she moved to Boston to stay with her grandmother. Dix attended school in Boston and tutored children. She became ill several times and was forced to stop teaching. During one of her bouts of illness, her physician suggested that she spend time in Europe. While visiting overseas, Dix met with groups of reformers interested in changing the way that mentally ill were cared for. Once Dix returned to the United States, she set out to tour mental health hospitals across the country. She often reported her findings to several politicians. Dix pushed states to care for the unfortunate. Although many politicians disagreed with her work, she moved forward. She eventually established asylums in New Jersey, North Carolina, and Illinois. She worked to pass federal legislation that would create a national asylum, though the bill did not pass. When the Civil War started, Dix completely dedicated herself to the Union cause. She was designated as a superintendent of the Army of Nurses for the Union Army. Although many believe she set impossibly high standards for recruited nurses, the Army of Nurses was extremely successful and crucial in advancing the role of nurses in the war and in the medical field. Well, if there's anything that Shark knows, it's that all good nurses meet standards, but great nurses set higher ones. Dix was also known for treating both Confederate and Union soldiers, a practice which gained her respect from many. During a period when male doctors openly expressed disdain for female nurses, Dix continued to push for formal training and more opportunities for female nurses. Over the course of the war, she appointed more than 3,000, or about 15% of the Union Army nurses. She stepped down from the position in 1865. After the war, Dix raised funds for the building of the National Monument to honor deceased soldiers, which stands at Fort Monroe, Virginia, today. She continued fighting for social reform throughout her life. Her work in support of better care for mentally ill culminated in the restructuring of many hospitals, both in the United States and abroad. After suffering from illness, Dix returned to New Jersey, where she spent the remainder of her life in a specially designed suite in the New Jersey State Hospital. She died on July 17th in 1887 and is buried in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Well, it is an honor, especially this month, that we celebrate such an amazing hero. Dorothea Dix, we honor you, our July historical hero. Thank you, and remember, swim safe, everyone. Swim safe. Goodbye. This month, we are spotlighting the great Augusta Ada Byron King, Countess of Lovelace. According to Wikipedia, Ada was born in December 1815, and she was an English mathematician and writer, chiefly known for her work on Charles Babbage's proposed mechanical general-purpose computer, the analytical engine. She was the first to recognize that the machine had applications beyond pure calculation. Ada Byron was the only legitimate child of poet Lord Byron and Lady Byron. All of Byron's other children were born out of wedlock to other women. Byron separated from his wife 1 month after Ada was born and left England forever. He died in Greece when Ada was 8. Her mother remained bitter and promoted Ada's interest in mathematics and logic in an effort to prevent her from developing her father's perceived insanity. Side note, just a little background information. By the way, Ada had a half-sister/cousin. That's right, Lord Byron had a child with his half-sister. So there's a lot of colorful history in this young lady's life. And her mother didn't want her following her father's footsteps down poetry and literature, so she tried to encourage her to stick with the math and sciences. Lovelace was often ill, beginning in her early childhood at the age of 8. That's about when her father died. She experienced headaches that obscured her vision. In June of 1829, she was paralyzed for a bout of measles, and she was subjected to continuous bed rest for nearly a year, something which may have extended her period of disability. By 1831, she was able to walk with crutches. Despite the illnesses, she developed her mathematic and technological skills. Lovelace became close friends with her tutor, Mary Somerville, who introduced her to Charles Babbage in 1833. She had a strong respect and affection for Somerville, and they corresponded for many years. Other acquaintances included scientists Andrew Cross, Sir David Brewster, Charles Wheatstone, Michael Faraday, and the author Charles Dickens. She was presented at court at the age of 17 and became a popular belle of the season, in part because of her brilliant mind. By 1834, Ada was a regular at court and started attending various events. She danced often and was able to charm many people, and was described by most people as being dainty. On the July 8th of 1835, she married William, 8th Baron of King, becoming Lady King. Ada was also a descendant of the extinct Barons Lovelace, and King was made Earl of Lovelace in 1838. Ada thereby became Countess of Lovelace when she was 18. Her mathematical talents led her to a strong working relationship and friendship with the fellow British mathematician Charles Babbage, who is known as the father of computers. She was particularly interested in Babbage's work on the analytical engine. With the article, she appended a set of notes explaining the analytical engine's function was a difficult task. Many other scientists did not grasp the concept, and the British establishment had shown little interest in it. Lovelace's notes even had to explain how the analytical engine differed from the original difference engine. Lovelace's notes are important in the early history of computers, especially since the seventh one contained what many consider to be the first computer program. That is, an algorithm designed to be carried out by a machine. In her notes, Ada Lovelace emphasized the difference between the analytical engine and previous calculating machines, particularly its ability to be programmed to solve problems of any complexity. She realized the potential of the device extended far beyond mere number crunching. This analysis was an important development from previous ideas about the capabilities of computing devices, and anticipated the implications of modern computing 100 years before they were realized. Lovelace believed that intuition and imagination were critical to effectively applying mathematical and scientific concepts. She valued metaphysics as much as mathematics, viewing both as tools for exploring the unseen worlds around us. In commemoration of Ada Lovelace, the computer language, Ada, created on behalf of the United States Department of Defense, was named after Lovelace. The reference manual for the language was approved on December 10th, 1980, and the Department of Defense Military Standard for the language, the MIL-STD-1815, was given the number of the year of her birth. Lovelace died at the age of 36 on November 27th, 1852, from uterine cancer. The illness lasted several months, and at which time her daughter took over her care, and under her mother's influence, Ada had a religious transformation and was coaxed into repenting of her previous conduct. She lost contact with her husband after confessing something to him on August 30th, which caused him to abandon her bedside. It is not known what she told him. She was buried at request next to her father. There were quite a bit of interesting facts that went along with Ada's life and the personal struggles that she went through, so I definitely encourage you to take a look. Very interesting. Well, without you, Ada, it looks like the Big Bad Shark Show once again would not exist. So thank you for your contributions to programming and the modern computer. We are honored to spotlight this month's historical hero, Ada Byron King. Thank you, Ada. And remember, swim safe, everyone. Swim safe. This month, we are spotlighting the great Dr. Lucy Hobbs Taylor. According to Wikipedia, Dr. Lucy Hobbs Taylor was born March 14th in 1833 in Constable, New York. She was the 7th out of 10 children total. When she was 12, she obtained a job as a seamstress to help support her siblings. Hobbs subsequently attended school and eventually graduated from Franklin Academy in New York and began teaching for 10 years in Michigan. In 1859, she moved to Cincinnati and applied to medical school, but was denied entrance because of her gender. But she was able to study privately under the supervision of a teacher from the medical school. Subsequently, Hobbs applied to the Ohio College of Dentistry, and when she was refused admission to dental school, once again for her gender, she began a private program of study with a professor, Jonathan Taft, from the Ohio College of Dental Surgery. Now, Hobbs applied once more to the dentistry program, but was once again rejected for being a woman. As a response, she opened up her own practice, allowing her to practice dentistry without having to obtain a diploma. In 1861, she decided to open her own practice instead of attempting to get into college once again. So after a year, she moved to Iowa and opened a dentistry practice. So this allowed her to be accepted as a dentist without the diploma and become part of the Ohio State Dental Society. As part of this, she was also serving as the group's delegate to the American Dental Association convention. Only 3 years after moving to Iowa, with great coincidence, that same year in 1865, the Ohio College of Dentistry decided to waive the policy prohibiting women from being admitted to the institution. Well, thank God. Finally. Instantly, Taylor enrolled as a senior student. Thanks to her dentistry experience she had accumulated over the years, she graduated in 1866, becoming the first woman in the world to graduate from a dental college and to receive a doctorate in dentistry. After studying dentistry, she started her own practice in Cincinnati in 1861. She soon moved to Bellevue and then McGregor, Iowa. She there spent 3 years. In 1865, she finally gained professional recognition and was allowed to join the Iowa State Dentistry Society and was sent as a delegate to the American Dental Association convention in Chicago. That November, she entered the Ohio College of Dental Surgery as a senior, where on February 21st, 1866, she earned her doctorate in dentistry, becoming the first woman in the world to graduate from a dental college. She later wrote, "People were amazed when they learned that a young girl had so far forgotten her womanhood as to want to study dentistry." Hobbs next moved to Chicago, where she met James M. Taylor, whom she married in April 1867. Taylor then convinced her husband to also enter dentistry. The two then moved to Lawrence, Kansas, where they had a large and successful practice until he died in 1886. After her husband's death, she ceased to be an active dentist, but became more active in politics, campaigning for greater women's rights until her own death, October 3rd, 1910. In her time as a dentist, Lucy Hobbs Taylor opened up brand new doors to many women in the future, especially in the medical field. She believed that her journey was complete by making it possible for women to be recognized in the dental profession on equal terms with men. By 1900, almost 1,000 women had followed Lucy Taylor into dentistry, an increase many attribute largely to her accomplishments. In 1983, the American Association of Women Dentists honored Taylor by establishing the Lucy Hobbs Taylor Award, which it now presents annually to the AAWD members in recognition of professional excellence and achievements in advancing the role of women in dentistry. Well, Dr. Lucy Hobbs Taylor, thank you for carving that path for the many women dentists that followed, and for many of the women that followed in your footsteps in general equality. Thank you for your service and contributions to our world. We are honored to spotlight Dr. Lucy Hobbs Taylor for this month's Historical Heroes. Thank you, and remember, swim safe, everyone. Swim safe. Goodbye. This month, we are spotlighting Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin Shelley, Mary Shelley. According to Wikipedia, Mary was born in 1797. She was the second child of the feminist philosopher, educator, and writer Mary Wollstonecraft, and the first child of the philosopher, novelist, and journalist William Godwin. Wollstonecraft died shortly after Mary was born. She was raised by her father, who provided her with a rich, informal education, encouraging her to adhere to his own anarchist political views. In 1801, when she was 4, her father remarried a neighbor, Mary Jane Claremont, with whom Mary came to have a troubled relationship. In 1814, Mary began a romance with one of her father's political followers, Percy Shelley, who was already married. Together with her stepsister, Claire Claremont, she and Percy left for France and traveled through Europe. Upon their return to England, Mary was pregnant with Perry's child. Pregnant and often ill, Mary Godwin had to cope with Percy's joy at the birth of his son by Harriet Shelley, his first wife, in late 1814, and his constant outings with Claire Claremont. Shelley and Claremont were most certainly lovers, which caused much jealousy on Godwin's part. Over the next 2 years, she and Percy faced ostracism, constant debt, and the death of their prematurely born daughter. They married in late 1816, after the suicide of Percy Shelley's first wife, Harriet, whom had just given birth 2 years prior. It was also in 1816 the couple and Mary's stepsister famously spent a summer with Lord Byron and John William Polidori near Geneva, Switzerland, where Shelley conceived the idea for her novel, Frankenstein. The Shelleys left Britain in 1818 for Italy, where their second and third child died before Shelley gave birth to their last and only surviving child, Percy Florence Shelley. In 1822, her husband drowned when his sailing boat sank during a storm. A year later, Shelley returned to England, and from then on devoted herself to the upbringing of her son and a career as a professional author. The last decade of her life was dogged by illness and most likely caused by the brain tumor, which eventually killed her at the age of 53. Until the 1970s, Shelley was known mainly for her efforts to publish her husband's works and for her novel Frankenstein, which remains widely read and has inspired many theatrical film adaptations. Studies of her lesser-known works support the growing view that Shelley remained a political radical throughout her life. Shelley's work often argue that cooperation and sympathy, particularly as practiced by women in the family, were the ways to reform civil society. This view was a direct challenge to the individualistic romantic ethos promoted by Percy Shelley and the Enlightenment political theories articulated by her father, William Godwin. Well, this month we are delighted to spotlight the amazing Mary Shelley. Thank you for your contributions to women, equality, and literature. Thank you for watching, and remember, swim safe, everyone. Swim safe. Goodbye. If you have one of the Wise Women calendar, you can follow along with our historical heroes each month. If you'd like to learn more about Mary Shelley, follow the link below. This month we are spotlighting the great Susan Anthony. According to National Women's History Museum, Susan Anthony was a champion of temperance, abolition, the rights of labor, and equal pay for equal work. Susan became one of the most visible leaders of the women's suffrage movement. Along with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she traveled around the country delivering speeches in favor of women's suffrage. Susan B. Anthony was born on February 15, 1820, in Adams, Massachusetts. Her father, Daniel, was a farmer and later a cotton mill owner and manager, and was raised as a Quaker. Her mother, Lucy, came from a family that fought in the American Revolution and served in the Massachusetts state government. From an early age, Anthony was inspired by Quaker belief that everyone was equal under God. That idea guided her throughout her life. She had 7 brothers and sisters, and many of whom became activists for justice and emancipation of slaves. After many years of teaching, Anthony returned to her family, who had moved to New York State. There she met William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass, who were friends of her father. Listening to them moved Susan to want to do more to help end slavery. She became an abolition activist, even though most people thought it was improper for women to give speeches in public. Anthony made many passionate speeches against slavery. In 1948, a group of women held a convention at Seneca Falls, New York. It was the first women's rights convention in the United States and began the suffrage movement. Her mother and sister attended the convention, but Anthony did not. In 1851, Anthony met Elizabeth Cady Stanton. The two women were good friends and worked together for over 50 years fighting for women's rights. They traveled the country, and Anthony gave speeches demanding that women be given the right to vote. At times, she risked being arrested for sharing her ideas in public. Anthony was good at strategy. Her discipline, energy, and ability to organize made her a strong and successful leader. Anthony and Stanton co-founded the American Equal Rights Association. In 1868, they became editors of the association's newspaper, The Revolution, which helped spread the ideas of equality and rights for women. Anthony began to lecture to raise money for publishing the newspaper and to support the suffrage movement. She became famous throughout the county. Many people admired her, yet others hated her ideas. When Congress passed the 14th and 15th Amendments, which gave voting rights to African American men, Anthony and Stanton were angry and opposed the legislation because it did not include the right to vote for women. Their belief led them to split from other suffragettes. They thought the amendments should also have given women the right to vote. They formed the National Women's Suffrage Association to push for a constitutional amendment giving women the right to vote. In 1872, Anthony was arrested for voting. She was tried and fined $100 for her crime. This made many people angry and brought national attention to the suffrage movement. In 1876, she led a protest at the 1876 centennial of our nation's independence. She gave a speech, Declaration of Rights, written by Stanton and other suffragette Matilda Jocelyn Gage. Anthony spent her entire life working for women's rights. In 1888, she helped to merge the two largest suffrage associations into one, the National American Women's Suffrage Association. She led the group until 1900. She traveled around the country, giving speeches, gathering thousands of signatures on petitions, and lobbying Congress every year for women. Anthony died in 1906, 14 years before women were given the right to vote, with the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920. This month, we are extremely honored and very grateful for the life work of Susan Anthony. Thank you for joining us on this special Historical Heroes. Swim safe, everyone. Swim safe. Goodbye. Wow. I don't know about you, but I think that we are so much better in this world thanks to those 12 women. And kudos to them. They laid the groundwork and set out the path for all of us to follow. So make sure you reach out and celebrate all the women in your life on this International Women's Day. Thank you for joining me here. And remember, swim safe, everyone. Swim safe. Goodbye.